Hey there, it's Kenzie from Details to Enjoy, and today I'm going to be DIYing the kits from our Size A May and June subscription box. The box comes with 2 kits and some DIY supplies, so I'm going to go ahead and set those aside and start with my Floral Hex kit. For my insert, I'm going to be using the color Mount Etna by Sherwin. So I'm just going to put a little bit of this onto my paint tray. And if you're crafting along with me, just keep in mind that this is way more paint than I needed. I probably only needed about 1/4 of this because this is such a dark color and it covers so well. So I'm just painting a really thin coat of paint onto my insert and then smoothing out any areas that are pooled up. After a few minutes, that first coat was dry and I was ready to move on to my second coat. But first, I'm going to be taking a clean sanding block and sanding this down just to smooth it out a little bit, and then using a clean cloth to wipe away any of the excess dust. Then I did my second and final coat of this color, and I'm not going to sand after this coat because I don't want to alter the color too much and lighten it. I want to keep that nice, deep, dark color. Now I can move on to my hexagon pieces, and for one of the pieces I'm going to be using the color Golden Aura by Behr. And for this I'm going to dip my brush straight into the jar just to keep it easy and because I didn't want to pour out too much paint onto my tray. So I'm going to paint each of my coats, and I'm not painting the edges of my pieces at all, but I did end up needing to do 3 coats. So here I'm doing my second coat, and you can notice I'm not doing any sanding in between the coats. I'll save that for the very end when I go to distress it. For my other hexagon piece, I'm going to be using the BB Frosh Dark Wax, and normally we would use a wax cloth for this, but you can also use a foam brush. So I'm just getting a little bit of product onto my brush and rubbing that into the hexagon shape. And you'll want to make sure you remove all of the excess wax from here. So I'm using the side of my brush to do that because it's a little bit cleaner, and just making sure that everything feels smooth and not sticky and I have all of that excess removed. Next, I'll work on assembling all of my felt flowers, starting with the rose. For this one, I start on the outside of the spiral and start to roll that together pretty tightly in the center here to create the center of the rose. And then as I work out, I start to loosen a little bit and let the petals lay a little bit flatter to create a nice open rose shape. And now that I have everything rolled up, I can secure this. So I'm going to flip it over to the back side and place a dab of hot glue in the center of the back of the flower, and then press the end of my spiral into the hot glue to hold everything into place. Next, I will work on my fringe flower, and for this I'm just going to roll it from one side straight across to the other side, and then again secure it with a little dab of hot glue right at the end to hold everything in place. After everything is secured, I can fluff the fringe into the shape that I want. For the next flower, I'm going to tie a knot in the center of my rope piece, and just a single knot will do. And then I'm going to unravel the ends to make it nice and fluffy. To do this, I will just start untwisting and then comb my fingers through to separate all of the strands. Once that is ready, I can glue it into the center of my petal flower. So I'm adding a little dab of hot glue to the center knot, and I'm going to place that in the center of my petal flower and then pinch it together to create a little bit of dimension and get it all stuck together. And then I can go in and trim off the excess fringe. So I just need a little tiny bit of fringe here to create the center of my flower. So I'm trimming off all of the excess and then fluffing it into shape. Next, I'm going to add the leaves to the back of my flowers. And I'm doing the green leaves on the white and pink flowers just with a little dab of hot glue. And then I'm going to be adding my leather leaf to my fringe flower, and this is the flower that I made a mistake on. I added my hot glue like normal and then went to press my leaf into the glue, and I must have looked up at the monitor right when I was pressing it in, and instead of pressing the leaf into the glue, I put my finger straight into the glue and burned myself. So if you want to be safe, use a tool to press the leaves into the glue instead of your fingers. And the final thing I did before assembling this kit was sand the hexagon pieces. I used some clean sanding blocks to add a little bit of distressing to each side of the piece and also smooth out the top of the piece. And as I mentioned, you want to be using a clean sanding block for each thing, and you don't want to cross-contaminate your colors. So I'm using the other side of the same sanding block on my wax piece. And then again, I'm just using a clean, dry cloth to wipe off any of the excess dust that I created while sanding. Next, I can start to assemble everything together. So I'm going to place my hexagon pieces on my insert without adhering them, just to make sure that everything is centered and looking the way I want. I did this by eye, but you could also use a ruler. And then once I was comfortable, I was ready to stick them down. So I held the yellow piece in place and then peeled the protective backing off of the waxed piece and then placed that onto the insert, making sure to hold the yellow in place so it doesn't shift while I'm sticking this one down. And then I gently press on it to make sure it's stuck and repeat the same process with the yellow piece. Now I could add my flowers, and I decided I wanted the yellow on the right side, so I put some hot glue on my flower and stuck it down, but then realized that I should have placed all of the flowers onto the insert first to make sure that they were laid out in the correct layout and how I wanted them before gluing them down, just like I did with the hexagon pieces. Once I was happy with how everything looked, then I went in with my hot glue to secure everything in place. After fluffing the flowers a little bit and arranging the leaves just how I wanted them, this insert was done. And then I worked on my lemon kit. I'm using the same yellow that I used before on my lemons and painting the first coat here. You could work on both of your kits simultaneously if you wanted to, or work on other pieces while the paint is drying, but while I was waiting for my paint to dry, I decided to eat a little bit of Easter candy and enjoy a Reese's peanut butter cup. Then I could go in with my second coat of the yellow paint, and I'm keeping all of my edges black, so I just use my finger to wipe off the excess paint that I got on the edge. For my leaves, I'm using Bermuda grass by Behr, and I'm just squeezing a little bit of this onto my tray. Even this amount of paint was probably too much because I only ended up needing to do one coat on the leaves. Next, I painted my insert white with Silky White by Behr, and I'm working in thin coats rather than thick coats because the thin coats will dry faster and give you a smoother coverage. So I do 3 coats here, and I'll come back with a 4th later on. And while that third coat was drying, I went in with a sanding block to sand and distress all of my pieces. Again, making sure that you're using just one block per color and not cross-contaminating the colors. And then I used my cloth to wipe off all of the excess dust. And now that my insert was dry again, I could go in and sand this to make it a little bit smoother. And then after I sand it, I'm going to wipe it down and then do one final coat just to get a nice coverage. The coverage of each paint will depend on the color and the paint brand itself. With white, I do find I need to do more coats to get the coverage that I want. Now that everything is painted, dried, and sanded, I can start to assemble things. So again, I'm just placing everything without glue onto the insert to make sure that it is centered and placed the way that I want. And then once I'm happy, I can start to peel off that backing and stick everything down. And I'm just making sure to hold the other pieces in place so that nothing moves while I am sticking the pieces down. I hope you enjoyed following along with me, and if you create your own version of one of these projects, be sure to tag us on social media. It's Details to Enjoy on Instagram and Facebook.